Hello, it's 12:30 on a Tuesday, and I'm so pleased that you're joining myself and my special guest today. It's Tuesday, which means that it's the time for the Mindset Michelle TV show. And I'm so excited about my fabulous guest today. So honoured that he's taken the time out of his very busy schedule to join us. So today's special guest is Victor Perton. Now, Victor, who's also known as the optimism guy, the optimistic guy, is from the Centre for Optimism. And we are so blessed to have him here today to talk to us about a little bit about his background, about how to be more optimistic in life, and also his journey to being the optimistic guy. So Victor, welcome to the show.
Michelle, it is just so wonderful. And I still remember traveling in Paris singing the song Michelle Marbelle. So it evokes all sorts of wonderful imagery.
Thank you, Victor. And I know that over my life, it's been really interesting when people have started playing that song. It's not quite like Victor. I can't think of any Victor songs, but do you want to share a little bit about how you came to be the optimism guy?
Look, thanks for that, Michelle. It's a long story, so we've only got 30 minutes, so I'm just going to try and do it in 3 or 4 minutes. So I came from a refugee family, so it was pretty tough 2 generations ago. My grandfather was tortured to death. My grandmother was sent to the Gulag for 12 years. My other 2 grandparents were stateless refugees for a decade. But my grandmother was a very interesting key to it, because despite her ill health and everything that had happened to her, in the late 80s, she rang me and she said, "I want you to take me to the first rally of Sąjūdis," which was the Lithuanian freedom movement. And at the rally, she said to me, "I'm going to outlive communism." And I thought, wow. And of course, 4 years later, she did. So she was a great role model to me. And then my mother, who at the age of 12 became a refugee, was widowed when I was 7, worked 3 jobs to put my sister and me through school. She died last year in October, ever the optimist. And she said to me, "Vic, you've done so many amazing things in your life, but no more important thing are you doing in your life than asking this question of people: what makes you optimistic?" And then for me, the journey to get to here, I'd been a barrister, a member of parliament, and then the most relevant period was my time as trade commissioner in North and South America, where everywhere I went, my work was made more easy by being an Australian. The stereotype of the optimistic, positive Australian opens doors. And then after that, I was a senior advisor to the Australian G20 presidency. And at that super elite level of presidents, prime ministers, finance ministers, central bank governors, it was exactly the same. Australians are regarded as no bullshit, and people trust us. And then I came back to Melbourne, and I was astonished by the negativity of language around leadership. And I had changed from the life that I'd led, but Australia had changed more. And so rather than waste time complaining about it, I set up the Australian Leadership Project. And we interviewed 2,500 people on Australian leadership. And it won't surprise you, the 3 qualities that distinguish an Australian leader is egalitarianism. We talk to the cleaner the same way we talk to the chairman. Self-effacing humour. You and I have already spent, some time today laughing at ourselves. And then thirdly, no bullshit, plain speaking. Now, if those are the 3 qualities of Australian leadership, there are millions of people like that. And that's why the Prime Minister was one of the, invited guests at the G7. That's why we're a leader in the G20. So I was still bewildered by the negativity. And then my eureka moment came at the Global Integrity Summit in 2017, when my speech was the case for optimism in integrity. And it electrified the room. And then I realized the problem was not the problem of leadership. The problem is the problem of pessimism. And so what we do at the Centre for Optimism is to promote realistic and infectiously optimistic leaders. And the way we do that is not to preach and tell people why they should be optimistic. We ask them to ask that question of themselves: what makes you optimistic? And
Wow.
Michele, what makes you optimistic?
What a question. And it's quite a profound question, isn't it? And it's one that I think does have so many complexities, a bit like your life story that you shared there. So, what is it that makes me optimistic? I think one of the things that makes me so optimistic about myself, my life, Australia, and the future is the journey that I feel like I've been on throughout my life and also in the people that I've attracted into my life. So at different times, obviously, things have been a bit difficult. Like yourself, my mum died a couple of years ago, and it was the people that were around me at the time that helped me to grieve and move through that. And interestingly, those same tools that I set up at the time, like I had a list of people that I would call on different time zones, depending on what was happening with mum. And so my optimism is based on, I guess, going through difficult periods in life, working out some new tools, and then using those tools and going, oh, yeah, I've got this. I can get through this. Things are going to get better. The sun will come up tomorrow. So, like that call list, but some of them unfortunately died as well. But the other people and new names came in to join it. So I'm continuously optimistic and hopeful that, you know, myself learning those new skills, other people learn new skills too. So we're all on this fabulous journey called life together, becoming better as best as we can in our own lives.
That is genius, Michele. And what's really interesting is we just put together a working group, Centre for Optimism, on grief and optimism. How
Ah,
does the optimist grieve, but how does the optimist console the grieving?
yeah.
And it's the fact that you pointed to that, it's genius, because we all have to go through grief. But as one of our leaders, Christy, says, suffering is optional.
Yeah. Well, and in my world, in transformation and change, it's the same kind of process. Whether you're grieving for a loved one dying, you're grieving for an old persona or an old you as you go through those change processes. And the more that people understand that that's part of the process, that you're going to grieve, that you're not going to that same job you used to go to, or in that same relationship that you used to have, that grieving is okay, but it's about not getting stuck in it. And it's about also knowing when to go into it. So you do honor the process, but also when to start moving out of it.
What is amazing is the most popular resource on the Centre for Optimism website is a page devoted to Mother Julian of Norwich, who lived through the Black Death. And her book, The Revelations, I think is the oldest surviving book in English by a woman. And her famous phrase is, all shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. And there's been poetry devoted to it, songs, papal sermons. But it is the same definition we use today. Harvard, for instance, defines optimism as a belief that good things will happen and that things will work out in the end. And one of our cheeky members, Noreen, says that if it hasn't worked out, it's not the end.
Well, that's the movie I was thinking of as well, the Marigold Hotel movie. It's funny because I use that expression all the time as well, that if it's not all well, then it's not the end.
Well, you're nailing it, because one of the things we're doing in India, we help to work out who needed help in what hospitals, and we've got members in 2 hospitals that are helping themselves, one in Bangalore and one in the south at Mount Abu. But now one of the most important things we're doing, I've got an Indian intern helping me, is actually asking Indians what makes them optimistic. And I've walked the streets of India. I've asked women digging ditches what makes them optimistic. And, people in absolute poverty, when you ask them what makes them optimistic, and sometimes I've used an interpreter because, they've got a dialect that I can't speak, their faces always light up as yours did, Michele. And everyone's always got an answer to the question, what makes me optimistic?
And I guess it's interesting as well, because over the weeks of doing this show, one of the theme questions for me that fits in very nicely here is, what do you think success is? Because every week, everybody has such a different view, just like optimism. a different view about what success means to them. So what does success, given your incredible history in different areas, what does success now mean to you?
For me, it's bringing optimism into people's lives. As I shared at my mother's funeral in October, she'd said to me 2 weeks before, this is the most important work you've ever done. So I will continue asking people what makes you optimistic. And, COVID hit in the middle of our establishment, but we've got 5,000 members now in 63 countries, and prominent people, ordinary people, thinking people. So for me, it is bringing more optimism into people's lives. So last year we helped with the Nelson Mandela Youth Leadership Summit, and we took it from 60 kids in a dusty hall to 250 children from Denmark to Africa. But what was fascinating was that the people who benefited most from that were CEOs in New York and San Diego who just loved talking to children from regional parts of Australia. And then, we did something for the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival, where we actually, with a dose of optimism added to the mix, they went 2,000% over their budgeted registrations. And again, we turned it from a local event to a global event. So it's constantly forming and reforming, but I think central to it all is asking this question, what makes you optimistic? And then I have 2 teenage children. It's helping them to be the best people they can be. And, so this morning, it was about making breakfast and preparing lunch and, helping my son get to school to do the 2 exams he has to do. So family, friends, and you made a most profound comment earlier about in your grief, surrounding yourself with optimistic people. When I asked Bill George, the Harvard guru who wrote True North, when I asked him what makes him optimistic, he said being surrounded by positive people. And Michele, he used your words. He said, what a blessing.
It is. I think that, for me and for the clients I work with, helping them to resonate and to recognize their own internal processes so that it's never about denying or making them less than what they are, but being aware of them, but keeping that positive focus and keeping that direction of optimism that you're going in, that, it might be hard today, but tomorrow will be easier. The next day will be easier. And even if things seem a bit harder again next week, you had 1 day out of 7 rather than 3 days out of 7. So all of those little milestones, especially with grieving, that help people to see, okay, I'm making progress, I can do this. So the show we also talk here a little bit about tips that people can give. And given that you would have had so many people say to you what, optimism is and how to be optimistic, I'm sure there's many people watching that are going, yeah, I really want to be more optimistic, but what are some really good or practical tips? I loved when you were talking about your family and your son, because the practical tips can be getting him to his exams and being a happy, positive, optimistic influence around him rather than, a grumpy parent doing what he needs to do, because that rubs off when he's doing his exams, obviously. So what might be 3 tips or 3 areas that you could encourage people to be more optimistic themselves?
Yeah, so we've got 2025 Habits of the Optimist. So people just want to Google it. Habits of an Optimist is an animated course. It takes between 50 minutes and a lifetime. And people will love it because we've got all sorts of prominent people, including the Australian Boys Choir on video. My favourite habit of the optimist is to smile like an optimist. And that is, as you're doing now, Michele, whenever you're on a video, check in. Are your lips up or down? Walking the streets, are you smiling at people walking by? And we had a very famous artist from Sydney who'd recovered from drug addiction. And he was walking through King's Cross and people were smiling at him. He was, a typical bloke. He thought, is my zip undone? Have I got spaghetti on my shirt? But he was smiling at them and they were smiling back. So it doesn't matter whether you're at the checkout in the supermarket, on video, smiling is number one. number two, I mean, we do laughter, but there's only two of us here. So doing laughter yoga with two of us is going to be a bit more difficult. So I'll give you a different number two that has really resonated because we used it in prison. People have taken it away. It's worked in New Zealand. It's worked elsewhere. In Australia, if you greet someone and say, hello, how are you? 60% of people say not bad or not too bad. And do we ever say, oh my God, what's wrong? Why is it, what's bad? We don't. It's actually a wasted question and a wasted answer. So Michele, what I'd like your listeners to do for the rest of the day and the rest of the week is to get rid of the question, how are you? And replace it with whatever comes natural, but something like, what's the best thing in your day? Or towards the end of the week, you might say, what's been the best thing in your week? And I did this in a supermarket the other day. I had a checkout lady and we were talking and she said, what do you do? And I said this. And I said, look, why don't you try this for the day and we'll test it with the two people behind us. And there was a mother and a daughter. And when I said, what's the best thing in your day? The daughter was about 12. She lit up and said, I got 82% for my test today. And there was a beautiful conversation. So people get a refund from watching this if it doesn't work. But I guarantee 70 to 80% of the time, it will make your life better. And then the third one that I really like, the University of Vienna Medical School last year produced a report advocating this. The University of Surrey, a couple of months ago, produced a report. It's called My Best Self. And pretty simple. The end of today or tomorrow, take 10 minutes to write down a day in your life. 1 year hence, 5 year hence, 10 year hence, everything going right. And what does that day look like? You might start with breakfast, you might be giving a speech, you might be on a tropical island, you might be working hard, and then meditate on it for 5 or 10 minutes. Go for a walk, no phone, no nothing. Just think about that day. And the American military is apparently now using this. It's a very powerful tool for improving your optimism. So that'd be 3 tips. But as I said, we've got myriads and the habits of an optimist. I had a very senior British official tell me it was the best hour she'd spent during lockdown. And I said, oh, surely your husband or lover. She said, that didn't last an hour. Your course was better.
I love it. I love it. And I've used that exercise in a different kind of format about writing out what you would like in the future and making it very graphic. One of the things I really love about that exercise as well is that it's about the feelings. So in the same way that when I ask people each week, what is it like to be successful and tips for success, it's interesting that very few people actually say, oh, it's just money, money and more money or power or prestige or whatever. They always talk about experiences with family, with friends, with whatever it might be. And those things are all tied into feelings. And so I really love your second point, all of your points. The first one, the feeling when you smile at everybody and they smile back, you feel connected. The second one about reframing your how are you question to what's been the best thing, because then you're helping people to focus on the best thing in their lives and then they get to talk about it and share it with people. And the third thing around, looking with that positive future focus, it then empowers you to then build it. But the engine, the driver, if you like, of building it is actually the feelings. What does it feel like when you wake up in that 1 year, 5 years, whatever it might be? And
Michele, I have to share something with you. I did an event at an elderly citizens event, and we did laughter yoga. So we just, are you feeling brave?
Yeah.
Okay. So look, everyone who's watching, you're going to have to do this with us. Michele and I are going to laugh for 20 seconds. And the reason I do this, Michele, is we did this and everyone, their ribs hurt, their faces went red, and I'm thinking, I hope no one dies. And then the photographer said, oh my God, I didn't catch that on camera. Can you do that again? So ready, Michele, at the count of 3, we are going to laugh like optimists. Ready? So you're going to highlight both of us on the screen. Ready? 1, 2, 3. that's enough. I've gone red. My ribs are hurting. But look, if everyone does that 20 seconds a day, and I've got a great friend, I think you know her, Michele, Ros Ben Moshe, who's actually teaching a course at La Trobe called Laughter and Wellbeing. So that'd be the fourth one I'd throw in. Tell a joke and laugh like hell.
I love it. And you know, the funniest thing about the laughing then was I kept remembering the movie When Harry Met Sally, and she was at the table. That's why I started banging the table, because I thought, oh yeah, you know, I remember just instantaneously choosing to feel those emotions. And what a thank you for suggesting that, because what a wonderful way of actually showing that you can just do it. You don't need to be specially trained or anything. You can choose to be an optimist and then just do it, in the same way you can choose to start laughing and just do it as well.
And that film, When Harry Met Sally, you know, and everyone in the restaurant says, I'll have what she's having. You know, and you know, all of those old lovely romantic films. I was listening yesterday to the author of The Martian, and he was talking about the sort of science fiction he writes, which is uplifting and positive. And he said, look, that's what I grew up with. And interestingly enough, John Hagel chose us as his Asia time zone for the launch of his new book last week, The Journey Beyond Fear. And he talked about, as a child, retreating to his bedroom and reading science fiction that was uplifting. And one of the difficulties, we talk about teenagers today, is you switch on SBS or you watch any of these Blade Runners and the like, everything is dystopian, not utopian. And I think there's a big argument for utopian literature and utopian movies and utopian shows. And we've got to seek them out. And the other one, if you haven't watched it, Michele, When Harry Met Sally is one of my top films. The other one is the 1973 version of Lost Horizon, with the music of Burt Bacharach, and, you know, this notion of Shangri-La and the perfect world. And, you know, it's a beautiful film with beautiful music.
Oh, fabulous. It's interesting, you know, talking about movies and emotions and feelings and everything, because there's so many that do capture society. I know I came back to Australia a few years ago from living overseas as well, and I was fascinated that every second program was a crime thing about CSI, and realised as well that there was a problem if society was normalising all of that. But one of my other interesting insights that I got about myself was how lucky that my generation was. We grew up, you know, watching The Goodies, watching Doctor Who. So you had all of these really bizarre lateral thinking programs where reality wasn't reality. And I do credit it for, you know, normalising in my family and for me some of the ways that I think about things even now. I was at university when The Young Ones was on. So I was literally living with the experience of opening up the fridge and the food in the fridge looking like it was alive, because the other students in the unit, you know, had left all the food there. But in The Young Ones, for example, they might actually, you'd open the door and it would be a gateway somewhere else. So all of that escapism, like you're saying, you know, it allowed you to think of things differently, challenge things, compared to, like I said, when I came back to Australia a few years ago and it was all CSI. And there was none of that uplifting, none of that excitement. And I also, even more recently, with COVID and all the other things happening, I've been looking at, because, you know, older civilizations or cultures like European culture and British culture, my background, they would have things like pantomimes and stuff, because they've been through wars and depressions, etc. So you even compare the programs that you still see now from there, and they're all happy, silly, uplifting shows, compared to a lot of Australian shows, which are still really heavy and dull and dramatic, and none of it's uplifting. It's all very, very sad and depressing stuff.
Well, the reality television genre, you know, I saw that one of the competitors in one of the food shows is withdrawn for his mental health. Well, you know, when I watched the disparagement of the dish that he'd created, it was no wonder. So you've got this culture of disparagement, and instead of people being, you know, lauded for doing their best. You know, there's this ugly, disparaging humour. And, you know, when I said that one of the keys to Australian leadership is self-effacing humour, that is actually under some threat. Young people are not seeing the role models on television and the like. It's turned into this very disparaging at the expense of someone else's humour. And we've got to fight against that. You know, we've actually got to help kids learn the humour that makes people laugh rather than make people sad.
I still hear me, but I can see that my image is frozen. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you. That's the new phrase in the Oxford Dictionary.
Well, that's fabulous. And I'm glad that my image hasn't frozen on a really, really bad image, because sometimes I'm waving my hands around.
Michele, you have a smile. You've actually got the smile of the optimist. So I think that can be the frame when you publish the video.
That's it. So while I'm fiddling with the technical, and I'm glad that it hasn't killed the whole thing, Victor, do you want to just say to people how they can get hold of you and where they can connect with you?
Of course. And look, easiest place is the Centre for Optimism. So if people go to just Google the Centre for Optimism, if you sign up for the free membership, the updates and newsletter one, I'll uplift every one of your watchers and listeners to full membership so that they can benefit, right through 21 and 2022, because we're doing a lot of stuff, storytelling for optimists and all sorts of things. So, and as I said, our most popular page is Mother Julian of Norwich. Our second most popular page is the Marxist Gramsci, who was famous for saying pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. So there's something for everyone, but in particular, it's that fostering of realistic and infectiously optimistic leadership, Michele, which you are an epitome of.
Oh, that's very generous and very kind of you, Victor. I just think of myself as, getting up and doing the best I can each day and being really honoured and blessed to be able to have conversations like this with you. That really, I talk about heart singing, and this is what makes my heart sing. So the other question that people are always fascinated by each week is asking my guests, if you had the opportunity to go back in time and talk to your younger self, what would you say to yourself? What pearls of wisdom would you share?
I do that every week. There's always a youth audience, and the Nelson Mandela Youth Leadership Summit is there. And I always walk amongst the kids, and we ask them to gather around and ask each other what makes them optimistic. But the other thing I tell children is to remember that the leader looks like the person in your mirror. So I get them to get up and shout that. I get them to look into each other's eyes and tell each other that. And then I say that anyone who's got red lipstick or an erasable pen, go and put it on the mirror in the men's room, the ladies' room. The leader looks like the person in your mirror. And when you remember that, that everyone is a leader at some point, I think that's what I say to young people. Always remember that people are looking out to you for leadership.
That's wonderful, and so in tune with what I heard when I was younger, thankfully. It was all about Michael Jackson's song at the time, Man in the Mirror, was so poignant. And still today, it's one of those really inspiring songs. But just like having yourself on the show, which has been also really incredibly inspiring, and I can't thank you enough for coming on today, Victor.
Michele, it has been a great joy. Like you, my heart is singing. And last year we actually did a series with a friend, Carolyn Ward, called The Optimist Heart.
Oh.
And those who are watching in Sydney, under the Coca-Cola sign at King's Cross, there is a wonderful artist called George Hall. Go and buy yourself one of his paintings called The Optimist Heart.
Oh, fabulous. What a wonderful, wonderful way to end. And thank you so much again, Victor, and thank you to everybody watching today. It's been such a pleasure to have you join us for these brief moments in time. I'm sure, like myself, your heart feels full and you just feel so inspired. And I hope that today has helped you with the smiling more, asking different questions about how people are, and also writing out some points around what your life looks like and then being optimistic about it. But until now, thank you all for joining us today. And from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.